I'm Charles Stepanek. Welcome back to Pianist Academy and the Soundboard, where today I have the honor of bringing you publisher and music educator Phil Erklen. Phil has been teaching music since the 1970s, and not just music, but performance, technique, sight reading, theory, music history, orchestration, composition, engraving, and even audio and video production. And he fits all of that into normal weekly piano lessons for his students. He is the founder and CEO of the International Music Syndicate and the CCC Music Company, which publishes sheet music by a variety of contemporary composers like Kevin Olson, Phillip Keveren, David Lanz, Jackson Berkey, Wynn-Anne Rossi, and many, many more. He's toured and worked with some very famous groups, including the Piano Guys. And in his free time, he works on special projects with actor friends like Ariana Richards, who played Lex in Jurassic Park, and Debbie Turner, who played Marta in The Sound of Music, just to name a few. Phil's students have gone on to work as composers for film and TV. They've had success getting their music published at young ages, like 10 years old, and they've gone on to major in piano performance, get multiple degrees, and open studios of their own. Phil and I are something like neighbors now that I've moved to the Colorado Springs area last year. It's a pleasure getting together, Phil, and to talk today, so thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Great. Well, let's get started with a kind of a broad question. You've spent many years involved in music from a variety of perspectives. What piqued your interest in the first place to get involved in music, and what keeps you coming back day after day? And we could start with teaching, for example, and move on from there, or anything that you feel like talking about.
Well, teaching, I've been teaching for over 50 years. And if you want to make it sound longer, you can say half a century. I didn't get to start studying music until I was in my 20s. Mm-hmm. We were lower middle income, so we couldn't afford a piano or piano lessons. So when I got in the Air Force, I moved my bed out, moved in a grand piano, and slept on the floor. Uh-huh. And then from there, I got to study with great concert pianists and educators like Gyorgy Sandor and professors from Juilliard. I loved music at a young age and used to listen to the LPs, Earl Wild and Horowitz and Rubinstein, and always wanted to play the piano, but we could never afford it. Yeah. So that's when I started, was in my 20s. And
okay.
I keep coming back because so many students need to have that opportunity that I didn't have.
Mm-hmm. How did you go about, when did you find that you were interested in music? How did that happen? Because, I mean, for a lot of people, like you mentioned, it's somewhere you get exposed to it, and then you find out that you're interested in it, and then you continue to find out you're passionate about it. Was there a moment that you could define that was that kind of life-changing moment where you knew that this was the thing to do?
It was in elementary school, mm-hmm. and I just thought of this right now, when the teacher would be playing these beautiful pieces, and she would show the notes on the chalkboard as each one was happening, and that got me interested right then. And then I started listening to more artists and LPs. I'd listen to the different artists, and that was my first exposure, was in elementary school.
Okay. So let's talk about teaching specifically, and I had that long list of topics that you cover in lessons with your students. How did you come to a realization that all of that is really important, that they're all important for the developing musician?
Well, it's important not only to teach the theory and technique, but you really need to give those students the opportunity to go outside of the envelope, go outside of the box. They need to be exposed to composition, orchestration, arranging, engraving, how to put music down on a score, all of those things, because if not, you're denying them the opportunity of that exposure. And some of my students who were good pianists but turned out to be great composers, and they would have never known this had they not been exposed to those different areas.
Mm-hmm. How did that happen in your own life in particular? When did you, let's say, learn about composition first? And did you have a teacher that brought that into your life, or was it a thing that you discovered on your own that you want to now pass on to people?
Well, I always wanted to compose, and fortunately, I had great teachers who let me go into that realm. Mm-hmm. Professors from Juilliard and others who said, go ahead, give it a try and see what you come up with. And then they would see that, and then they might do a little fine tuning, but the core was really good. So that was it. I was hooked from there.
Okay. So when you teach a student, let's say, do you expose them to all of those different aspects, or do you feel out certain students, one at a time and say, well, we can spend a little more time working on composition with one particular student, or maybe there's more of a focus with another one? Is it like an individual thing, or do you try to cover it all with everybody? Or
Well, they're going to get it all, but not in the beginning. In the beginning, I'm working with the basics to get the musicality, and then I introduce those other subjects when the time is right, and when the time is right, or you let them try it. A student may say, well, I don't know if I can compose. You say, well, try doing this and see what you can do, and they find out that they can compose. And so you introduce it at the right time, and a teacher will know when it's time to introduce those subjects.
Sure. Do you feel that having that extended knowledge, or does it impact performance in particular? Like, do you feel that the fields cross over, and having knowledge about one, say, composition or arranging, it affects interpretation of other people's music?
It does cross over, and especially with music history. When you're playing a piece like Für Elise, okay, it's Für Elise, but when you know the background behind it, and who Beethoven composed this for, and why he composed it, it gets you a little bit closer to the composer, and maybe you feel a little bit more in the music.
More connected.
Exactly, more connected.
It's a personal, becomes something personal instead of this thing that's only on paper.
Or a bust, a white marble bust sitting in the corner from the head to the waist, and that's it.
Right.
So it gets a little bit more personal in knowing the composer and the music and why they wrote it. Right. And it's an enhancement. It's definitely positive.
Right, great. You were talking about a bust of Beethoven. I have a bust of Beethoven sitting over my desk where I compose. And he's always looking down on me. And sometimes it's inspiring, and sometimes it's very intimidating, especially those moments where I'm a little lost, or you may have writer's block, or things aren't going as smoothly. He looks down, and it's like, this is so easy.
Easy.
What's your problem?
Easy for him.
Right. Yeah, easy for him. No, but I think that's great. And in my own life, having that time, both first to work with composers of music, living composers of music, and have that one-on-one interaction in, let's say, something like a lesson or a coaching, having that interaction really opened up the world of how little there is in the score and on the paper to begin with, and how limiting that is. And I was in my early 20s when I finally had that opportunity to talk to someone like that, and to hear stories about what particular phrases meant to that person, and the visual that was in their mind, and things that you could never put down on paper. One in particular that comes to mind often is a composer told me this one passage was like wolves running through the snow in Alaska, leaving little paw prints, and it's in a forest, and it's nighttime, and there's the moon shining. And as soon as you have that context, the way that you play the passage and the way you interpret the rest of the piece around it completely changes. And that's something that you'd never really know unless you've had that opportunity. And once you've worked with somebody like that, then you find out that, well, I can think about every phrase from that perspective, or I can at least question what this is about. And it's not just a series of notes. It's so much more than that.
Well, it's very important to get with living composers. I compose a lot, and my students are playing those pieces, and then here they are sitting with a living composer, and this composer is evaluating what they're doing. So for some of those students, that can be a scary moment. Imagine if your Beethoven was alive today and you were playing one of his pieces and he's sitting right there. He might not be as kind as I am with my students.
So we're going to shift gears a little bit. We've gotten together in the past and talked a handful of times, and you've mentioned consulting with a hand surgeon to learn more about the anatomy of the hand and how the body works. How did you come to the conclusion that a conversation like that would be important for a pianist?
Well, one of the hand surgeons, I interviewed 5. One of the hand surgeons was actually a pianist. And there were just some things that didn't make a lot of sense, like building finger strength. And a lot of teachers still believe that there's muscles in the fingers and you can do these exercises to make them stronger. And that just is not the case. We know how the hand is now constructed, and technique is based upon other elements of the body. And the fingers are just basically, in most cases, an extension of a force generated from somewhere else, like shifting, rotating, thrusting, these type of things. So I wanted to interview these hand surgeons just to get some credibility behind my teaching. And they all confirmed exactly the same thing.
That, one, there aren't muscles in the hands, or the muscles that are there are in the palm.
Yep, right here.
And they don't. They play a very little role in what we do at the piano.
Exactly. You've got the tendons connected, and in fact, if you squeeze this here, it'll pull the fingers in. And if you're performing incorrectly or practicing incorrectly, you can end up damaging your arm, everything here, the wrist. You can end up with tendonitis, even carpal tunnel, if you do some of these old-fashioned exercises that are not applicable today. Maybe on the harpsichord it was, but not on the piano, modern piano.
The modern instrument it's so much heavier. The keys are so much heavier and it requires so much more force.
Energy, yes.
Yeah, to put into the system. Yeah, that's something I think a lot of people forget about earlier music, as the instruments were completely different. Even the key size was completely different. And the more you dig into what instruments pieces were written for, and even in particular as the modern piano was developed, say like a composer like Chopin, jumping forward in time, he is, from what I remember reading, he preferred instruments that had very light actions, and he really liked to play those instruments. That makes a huge difference, I think, in how you interpret his music and the difficulty of his music, if you can relate to the fact that he wrote this for a piano that was relatively easy to play, that it didn't require as much energy. And for example, Liszt was the opposite. He liked pianos that were much heavier and needed much more energy to activate. And I think you can see, once you know that, you can see the differences in composition and attribute a little bit of that to the types of pianos they preferred.
Well, I've had 2 pianos in my studio. One was the Horowitz 9-foot concert grand, and then the Van Cliburn.
Really?
Yes.
You had both of those here?
Yes, they asked me, not in this room, obviously, but at my former studio, they asked me for the city. Steinway asked me if I would host the piano so teachers could come and play on them. So the Horowitz piano was very light. The keys were very, very light. I played on a Broadwood pianoforte the same year and make that Beethoven had, that was shipped to him as a gift from England. And the action was so light on that. Yeah. Very, very light. So in the Mozart reproduction of that. But the Broadwood was actually an authentic Broadwood. It was not a reproduction.
Wow.
So it was very interesting to play on that piano. And with the day's pianos, like Liszt and Chopin, Liszt like the heavier action and Chopin a little bit lighter. Yeah. So it's really interesting to get the history of the pianos and how they evolved.
I had actually the opportunity to play both the Horowitz Steinway and the Cliburn Steinway also in New York City. That was a very neat opportunity. And you were right, especially the Horowitz piano, it was incredibly light. And that was a point in my life where I really disliked instruments that didn't have weight to them. Because I felt like I couldn't control them. And as I've grown, I've realized that's just so much easier. You can do so much more with so little effort. And I learned actually from playing those some of my own technical deficiencies. And that just, really having a lighter instrument can be a wonderful thing. But it was amazing. And I even remember stories of Horowitz's, one time I think his technician cleaned the keys, and Horowitz was furious because his fingers were going to slip off in mid-performance, and his technician came and hairsprayed, I think, all the keys to make them sticky again.
Yeah, that's just don't touch Horowitz's keys.
Right.
You can touch the case or anything else, but not the keys.
Yeah.
And Rubinstein didn't care.
Right.
You just get up there and do it.
Going back to the hand surgeon quickly, what were the one or two most important things that you learned from the discussion with the hand surgeon that was a pianist? Was it the lack of muscle, or was there something else? Or
he told me, and just confirmed how I teach, that you cannot build finger strength. You can develop a stronger grip. Like I'm also a black belt in judo, so with developing this here, you can develop a stronger grip, but you don't play the piano by gripping either. Right. So he informed me that what you have is basically hinge sticks on here that are pulled in from other mechanisms, and to have a good technique, and by the way, technique just means coordination. That's all it is using the other parts of the bodies. And if you watch a great jazz pianist or concert pianist, you'll see all of these things in motion that make their technique so great. That's one of the things. And the other thing he indicated to me is watch some of these exercises from the past when they want you to do certain things that could possibly cause some injuries, and you might not be able to play as effectively as you did in the past because of those injuries.
Right. Okay, what do you think sets a great piano teacher apart from just a good piano teacher?
Well, a good piano teacher is going to employ all of the necessary subjects like technique, sight reading, the literature, the style of it, and all of those important things. But the great teacher is the one who is going to expand beyond the envelope and let their students have the opportunity to learn about composition, engraving, arranging, even CD production and making your own YouTube videos. There's times where, like during the pandemic, I would record my students performing, and then it would go to other students so they could see what was going on, but it would be a video and not a Zoom, which was much more clear. But there is a difference between the good and the great. And the good teachers just need to not be afraid of expanding and jumping in and giving those students the opportunity to be the fullest that they can be. Go back to composition. One of the things I tell my students, this is something you can't buy at Walmart. Imagine composing something and dedicating it to your parents or to a friend, either at any holiday or their birthday. I mean, that is something very profound. It is something traditionally has been happening as far back as we can remember with those great composers. But to be able to do that, I used the technology way back before YouTube and all those. I would record a student playing in the beginning, and then I'd record them later on. And if they didn't think they were progressing nicely, I would let them listen to the two, and they go, "Oh my gosh, I'm really doing a good job."
That's a great idea. I haven't thought of that one. To show kind of, it's almost like a before and after, or before
situation.
and midway through if a student is getting caught up in the learning process. One of my teachers, when I was a teenager, I remember telling me that learning music can be like climbing a sand dune.
Oh, yes.
And that sometimes we can feel like we're always falling backwards, and we put in a lot of effort to keep going. And as long as we do keep going, we're eventually going to get to the top. And we're going to cross, the top of the dune, and we're going to see everything that we've accomplished. But in the meantime, it can be really difficult to feel like you're progressing because there's always that feeling of constantly falling behind. Like you learn something one day, and then you might come back the next day, and it's not as good as where you left it the previous day. And then you feel like you have to relearn something, or maybe you didn't spend the right amount of time. And I think that's just all part of the process. There's something to be said for practicing efficiently, but there's also the way the mind works. It just takes time to build the coordination and to build the neural pathways that
Well, and
connect all of this?
Like I said, technique is just coordination. I mean, I always have my students do a coordination test, the Laurel and Hardy coordination test, just to show them it's not strength. So I'll have them do this, grab their nose and ear, then do this, nose to ear, nose to ear, and they'll do some funny things. They'll grab both cheeks, poke themselves in the eye, and you need to try that because it's not as easy as it looks, but it's just coordination. It's the same with the piano. It has to do with coordination. And if they get discouraged, they're seeing their practice from day to day. They may not realize that they are progressing. We as teachers see them about once a week. We can see from here to here, and we can go, no, that's a lot of improvement from last week.
Right. It's much easier to be objective about that. Do you have your students make recordings of themselves?
Oh, yes.
Like during their practice time?
All the time. They're recording during practice. And I do something interesting. I turn them into the teacher. And I will sit down and play their piece, and I would do some things that's not quite correct, and to see if they will point it out. And they do point it out, because that puts their mind in a different realm when they're the teacher and hearing that piece being played by someone else.
Right.
So that helps them learn also.
Right.
The ear is like taste buds, and it needs to be developed. One of the important things I have my students do is called setting the stage. They may be at someone's house and there's a piano, and they're asked to play the piano because they know that they're studying music, and to be able to set the stage. As we know, setting the stage is putting up the piano and the chairs, but there's a mental setting the stage also, is preparing them. Okay, I'm going to play this piece. This was used in the movie Amadeus, and it's called the Klaverstück. This is when Mozart was blindfolded, and people go, oh, I remember that scene. And the piece I'm going to play for you is very short. So you got to let them know right away it's not going to be all three movements of a sonata, and it puts everybody at ease. So setting the stage is part of that historical also.
So we're going to shift gears a little bit again, and I'd like to talk about publishing for a little while. As you know, part of the intention of this interview series is to showcase that there are a large variety of ways for people or musicians to make a career in music. And of course, teaching is one of those, and it's probably the one that we most commonly come across, I think, second to performers themselves or something like that. But we don't hear about publishing, I think, very often. And in my own life, outside of the people that I know at musicnotes.com, where I publish music, I don't think I know a single other individual involved in music publishing, but it's been a big part of music for hundreds of years now. I mean, it is the way that you can distribute music from the composer to everybody else. So why did you start your publishing company? How did that come about? And what were your thoughts before you got into that?
Well, it's easier to publish today compared to centuries ago. I started my publishing company because of two young ladies. They each started with me at the age of 8. They graduated at the age of 18. Now they're off doing their own thing. One of them is composing music for National Geographic, Netflix, HBO Max, and it's a long, long list. But these two individuals were doing great on the piano, but one of them had compositions they would show other teachers, and the other teachers would do nothing with those compositions. They just gave them new pieces to play. And so she was getting discouraged and was ready to quit. But her mother said, well, we've heard of this one teacher who does work with composition and those elements. So they came to me, and the rest is history. Now, both of them being wonderful composers, I knew I could not approach a major publishing company like Hal Leonard, FJH, Alfred, any of those. So I said, we're going to publish our own music. So those two ladies are the ones who got me started. They were the seeds, and now it's grown into something, a big oak tree, beyond what I expected.
Yeah.
So that's what got that going.
So that's how that started. Interesting. So you also have worked with some of the, I would say, the biggest names in contemporary piano, like David Lanz, like Phillip Keveren. How did those affiliations come about? Did you know them prior to starting the publishing company, or was there something that happened after the publishing company had been going? Or
every single one of them, it's a long story, and I can't give you the long story for each one, but the right moment, the timing, everything is perfect when I met these individuals. And each one is a story within itself. And then we became great friends. And then I started publishing like Kevin Olson's music,
Right.
Phillip Keveren, Jackson Berkey, Wynn-Anne Rossi. It's a long, long list. And then I found more young contemporary composers who had exceptionally wonderful talent. And their name wasn't up there, like Kevin Olson. But I remember one teacher saying, well, Kristen is not a Kevin Olson. And I said, well, when Kevin Olson started composing, he wasn't a Kevin Olson either. He's starting right from the beginning. So I wanted to give these young, exceptionally gifted composers the opportunity to have their music published and distributed throughout the United States. And now we're moving into Canada and other realms.
That's great. That's wonderful. Giving students those opportunities, I think, is so valuable. And it's something, the music business, I think, has a history of being kind of a walled-in community and it being difficult to break into it. And I think anything that we can do that helps break down the barriers that make it so difficult to become a professional musician, those are great things. And publishing is one of those, making publishing accessible to kids.
Well,
Kids that have some talent that's being developed, then they deserve those opportunities.
And you've got different ways of publishing, like self-publishing. But if you get in with a recognized publishing company, or they're recognized throughout the United States, that gives you a little bit of icing on the cake. So you can do both, have self-publishing, but be connected to other publishers, and that just expands your exposure to other students and teachers.
So was this, when you started publishing, did you have affiliations, or did you know people in publishing already, or was this a completely new endeavor where you had to learn everything kind of from scratch?
I was friends with Frank Hackinson, who's the founder, president of the FGH Music Company, and then Helen Marley, the director of the piano department. And so I kind of modeled a little bit of what they were doing, but I added some extra things in there. Like, for instance, if you go to a music store and you open it up and you don't know what it sounds like, you can scan it with your phone and you can hear the music instantly. So I did some additional things for that. So all of our publications have professional recordings that go with it. And a lot of the areas were new, and I had to explore and experiment. And fortunately, with the modern technology we have today, you can print things out and look at them, throw it away, and then go with take two. And go like that. But establishing how they're going to be paid online for your customers and all of that. So I just recommend for students to seek out the professionals who are willing to give their experience to them, and then those students don't have to go through all the things we had to go through.
Right. So I have one more question for you today, Phil. Do you have any words of wisdom or advice that you would give to an aspiring professional musician? Maybe they already know that when they're 10 or 12 years old, maybe they're in high school, maybe they're in their 20s. Is there something that where age doesn't matter? Any words of wisdom that you could offer?
Well, age doesn't matter. I mean, look at Mozart way back then. His father was his first teacher, but this reflects back on what I just said previously. Seek out the professionals who are willing to help you, and this will take a little bit of time, but it'll prevent you from all those roadblocks that the professionals may have had to go through to get where they're at. And talk to them. The great artists of the day are willing to sit down and talk with you and share their experience and which road, all the different roads to take to get you there, and never get discouraged.
Right. Just keep going. Keep on trucking.
Keep going. Don't worry about it. Just keep going on.
Okay. Well, thank you, Phil. It's been a pleasure chatting. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found today's interview insightful and enjoyable to listen to. If you're interested in checking out the music that CCC Music Company publishes, you can go to their website, www.cccmusiccompany.com, and I will leave that link clickable in the description below so you can go right there. And like Phil mentioned in the interview, you can not only purchase the music there, but you can also listen to recordings of it, which is great, right on the website. Plus, every time that you purchase a physical copy of the music, you also get a free complimentary PDF copy as well. So that's super great. Anybody that is interested in learning some music that's between beginner level and early advanced to medium advanced level, it's a wonderful place for you to visit. And teachers, if you're looking for new repertoire that maybe you aren't familiar with, maybe you do know some of the composers that Phil features, but go check out the website. There will be plenty of things for you and your students to find and check out. Thanks again for watching. Remember, practice smarter, not harder. And I'll see you next time you visit Pianist Academy.